Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Not Your Normal Murder. My name's Mary.
And I'm Deirdre.
We're so glad you guys are here back with us.
Yes, thank you for coming back.
We are coming from beautiful sunny Georgia. I'm here visiting my sister, and it's so much easier recording in the same room.
I know, we're not like stressed out about the sounds and having to edit it together and everything.
Yeah, we're definitely going to have to figure something else out of that. GarageBand is a nightmare. So I'm here just visiting my sister and my beautiful niece. So very lucky. Did you see the tweet Lady Gaga tweeted? And she said, fame is prison. And Amanda Knox replied and said, I hear you, but prison is prison.
That doesn't even make any sense to me. I mean, I guess I can kind of get it where you don't want to leave your house because of the paparazzi, but...
No, for sure. I can totally see her point of view where, yeah, like you can't even go to Jamba Juice without people craning their neck to get a picture of you. But also at the same time, she's a billionaire, right? Like, well, maybe not a billionaire, but she is a 100 millionaire, probably.
I love Gaga, and I am a little monster, and I'm obsessed with her, but I'm going to totally say you can skew any negative thing in your life as a prison. Yeah. Like, being poor is a prison.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. Just be happy with what you got. Grateful.
I think we all say stuff that is like a huge exaggeration we don't really mean, but most of us don't have a million Twitter followers who call us out on it.
Yeah, very true. If I tweeted that, I wouldn't even get one response, I promise.
So this week we're talking about a really crazy episode. It was actually suggested to me by our other sister, Tara, and her husband, because he remembers when this happened. He was following it in the newspapers. And actually, I realized after I wrote this, Crime Junkie actually talked about it for a second. I think they covered it in their Patreon episodes, which I haven't ever listened to.
Yeah, I've never listened to one of their Patreons.
But, so it might sound familiar to you, but I think this is actually a little bit more in depth because I think they tied this into a story where they talked about a serial killer and they talked about all his crimes, and this is about possibly one of his victims. So it's going to be a lot more specific. So I hope if you had listened to that you learned some things today about this case that maybe you didn't know before. So, I love to get into the details. So, Joel Kirkpatrick was born on July 13th, 1987 to his parents, Julie and Leonard Kirkpatrick, and they were young parents. Julie was only 18, and Joel was born on his father's 19th birthday. They had met at 15 years old. They married young. Leonard, who went by Len, began working as a minister, but things were not idyllic for this young couple. By the time he was 6, Joel's parents would divorce. Julie would first allege mental and physical abuse before ultimately filing the divorce as irreconcilable differences. At first, Julie had primary custody of Joel, but over the next 4 years, a bitter custody dispute would ensue. It seemed like the ex-couple just couldn't agree on anything. For example, Len would go to court to keep Julie from homeschooling Joel, and Julie kept Joel from going with his father to his grandfather's funerals. 3 years after Julie and Len separated and Julie was awarded temporary primary custody, the courts changed their minds and gave permanent primary custody to Len, which I feel like that's pretty rare for a dad. I don't really know how fair that is. It's probably really unfair, but I feel like the courts are pretty biased towards in favor of the mother.
I would agree. Whenever I hear about a dad winning sole custody or more custody than the mom, I'm thinking like there must have been some crazy circumstances involving that because you never hear about that.
Yeah. Maybe the tide is changing, but this was back in the 90s.
Yeah.
That was definitely more biased back then. The court cited that Lynn was in a better position to provide a better home life, and they stated that they felt like Julie's parents were the one caring for Joel all the time, and that when Lynn had Joel, Lynn was the one caring for Joel. So they felt like, why should he be raised by his grandparents when he could be raised by his father? So that was their rationale. Julie immediately filed an appeal, but in August 1997, an incident occurred where she refused to let Joel go home with Lynn one night after Lynn came to pick up his son, which did not work in her favor.
That never works.
Never
do that.
Never pull games like that.
It just makes you look bad.
So following this incident, Julie lost her appeal. 2 months later, in October of that year, Julie was living in Lawrenceville, Illinois, and commuting to Bloomington, Indiana, to pursue her PhD in education psychology. Girl after my own heart.
That is rough. Even if it's not every day, 90 minutes each way, even a few times a week would be so difficult.
And that's 3 hours out of your day. That is a long time. I'm sure there's people that commute that much every day now and they're like yelling at us.
Well, I mean, if you live in a big city like Chicago or New York, I feel like a lot of people have that commute. Or if they work in the big city, maybe they live in the suburbs, then you have to drive to the city, park at the train station, take a train into the city.
Or like Washington, D.C. A lot of people don't even live in Washington. They live somewhere completely different.
Like a different state or something.
Yeah. Although technically Washington, D.C. isn't a state.
I know.
I don't know how to say that.
They live in a state.
They live in a state.
And not Washington, D.C.
So in the middle of the night on October 13th, Julie would say that she awoke to the blood-curdling scream of her son. She said that this was not just a bad dream scream. She knew that this was different. She ran into her son's bedroom yelling his name, but he wasn't there. Instead, there was a man with a mask, and she said he tried to run past her to escape, but that she pursued him. Julie was actually a very experienced athlete in Taekwondo.
Wow.
She claimed that she grabbed onto his legs and he dragged her with him as he tried to escape. They continued to struggle all the way into the backyard, where eventually the man did get the best of her. He slammed her head into the ground and escaped. In nothing but a t-shirt and her underwear, Julie then ran to her neighbor's house and pounded on the door, begging for help. Having not seen Joel in his bedroom, she assumed that he had already been kidnapped.
That's not normal.
I mean, I'm sure you're in a panic. I don't know if she thought maybe there had been an accomplice who already left. I don't know, but you wake up in the middle of the night and there's a strange man in your house. But she didn't search for him. She just ran to the neighbors and asked for help.
Okay, I'm just already seeing red flags. I'm just, as a mom...
Well, you're the mom, so you give me your opinion. I'm not a mom.
I'm literally sitting here picturing this, and... I mean, we have cell phones now, so I would run back into the house to call 911, but I can't picture a scenario. That's just weird to me. Like, my first thought would be to find my child, not to run to the neighbor's house. Okay. I would search all over that house.
So that's weird to you?
That's weird, especially if the kid wasn't with him.
Okay, yeah.
Because he would have had to have had an accomplice that already escaped.
Yeah, that is, I can understand that, but I guess I just chalk it up to panic.
Well, another thing I immediately thought of as soon as you were telling this part of the story is she hears a scream and runs into the bedroom and she doesn't see him. Where did he go? Was she sitting around, like, checking Facebook before she ran into the bedroom? Like,
oh, that's true. Where could he have gone if he was there? Yeah.
If somebody took him, where did that person go with him in that 1 second?
The only thing I can chalk it up to is just panic. But, yeah, it would make sense that he's still in the house.
Is her bedroom on the other side of the house? Because some people have, like, a master suite on the other side of the house. I don't know. But I
don't know what the house looked like.
My baby's bedroom is close to mine, and somebody wouldn't... If she was screaming and I ran to her, I don't see where there would be enough time for you to not see something.
Okay. That's a good point. I hadn't really thought of it that way. But if we are to believe her narrative, we have to believe that at this point in time, she believed that Joel was already gone.
Yeah.
And she never went back into the house.
Okay.
So she goes to the neighbors. She calls 911. When the police respond, they search the home. they find the bloody, battered body of 10-year-old Joel. He had been stabbed repeatedly, and unfortunately, 2 of those stabs had pierced his aorta, which is a part of your heart, so he bled out very quickly and died. Julie herself had also been injured. She had a large gash, and her body showed signs of rug burn, which is consistent with the story that she was dragged by the killer as he tried to leave the house. Unable to bring herself to come back to her home, Julie then moved to Bloomington, Indiana, and she relied on her friends and family for a while to stay by her side constantly for her to feel safe. Investigators tracked down some initial leads. There was a rumor going around town that some teenagers high on meth had left a party to go steal electronics on the night Joel died. And the rumor was that they came back to the party afterwards and they were covered in blood. However, this story was soon ruled out. It was just a rumor. As I'm sure you know, of course, the main suspects are going to be the people closest to the victim, and in the case of a child, that's always going to be the parents. The father, Len, had an alibi with his new wife that he was home in bed with her all night. Investigators also claimed that immediately after this incident, they went to his house after the 911 call and found his car engine to be cool. He was also given 2 polygraph tests. He passed the question, "Did you kill Joel?" But for the questions pertaining to whether he was involved with arranging the murder, his results were inconclusive.
I never believe polygraphs.
I don't believe polygraphs, but I also don't believe alibis that are your mother or your lover.
Oh my gosh, I was thinking that as you were saying it. There's that murder that's blown up lately from like 25 years ago about the man that was killed by his friend when they were out fishing or whatever because the wife was having an affair with the friend.
Yes.
And the murderer's alibi was that he was at home in bed with his wife, and we all know that that was BS.
Well, I'm screwed because I never go anywhere. Me and my husband are always home together doing nothing.
I'm home about 99% of my day, so I would be screwed too.
I'd be screwed. I never believe your mother or your lover. And what is this bullshit that they went and felt his engine and it was cool?
Touching the engine is just, that's weird to me too. Like, that's the first thing they think of is to go check the dad's engine.
How long did it actually take for them to go get there and touch his car?
How far did he live?
What's the exact science of how cool it is?
Yeah, you would have to talk to an expert about how long an engine takes to cool.
Did he take his car? Did he take his wife's car? Did he take a neighbor's car? Did he take an Uber? Or the 90s Uber? Taxi?
A taxi, yes.
The 90s Uber.
The 90s Uber.
I'm not saying that he did it. I'm not accusing him in any way. I'm just saying that it's an interesting criteria they use to rule somebody out.
And polygraphs, like I said earlier, I never trust a polygraph.
I don't believe it. There's a reason that they're not allowed in court.
They're actually not unheard of to cheat the system at all.
Oh, it's very easy to.
It measures your heart rate. So
yes.
If you have an elevated heart rate the whole time you're answering questions, nothing's going to register.
Right. And it compares your anxiety to different questions. So if you think about something that makes you really anxious when they ask you the practice questions, like is your name Deirdre, and you're thinking about something that makes you anxious, that's going to completely alter the results.
Well, I am just always anxious all the time when I'm interacting with strangers. So like, even if I'm like checking out at the store and the cashier's talking to me, I'm like, ugh. Mm-hmm. So like, if I'm taking a polygraph, I'm gonna be nervous. Hello. Even if they ask me like, what is today? I'm gonna be, my heart rate's gonna be going nuts.
Yeah, but I mean, it just comes down to the fact that I think in most states, I think some allow polygraphs if the defense and the prosecution both agree. But most states don't allow polygraphs in court at all whatsoever.
Yeah. So
why are we even still using this? It's bogus.
I didn't even know people. Well, I mean, this is the 90s. I wonder if nowadays they even still use them because I thought that they were passé.
No, they still do, definitely.
That's weird to me.
I think it's basically used as a tool for the interview afterwards because they can be like, well, you failed that question. Give it up. Where's the body? I think he pretty much passed the polygraph because he passed the question, did you kill Joel? So after this, the investigators were much more interested in Julie, the other parent. The murder weapon had been a knife taken from her own kitchen, and investigators did not believe that there was evidence consistent with forced entry. This is something that I've noticed, is that investigators hate it when the weapon is taken from the person's own house. Because I think the thought is, you can't really count on the fact that, maybe she didn't have knives. She had a 10-year-old. It's perfectly plausible that maybe they got takeout every single night and she didn't, maybe she didn't have something that could be used as a murder weapon. You don't want to go into somebody's house when you don't know what they have and just hope for the best. You want to bring your own murder weapon with you.
I can see that, and I totally agree with you, but I can also see from a murderer's point of view, if the police are going to think, I'm going to bring my own weapon. If I take a weapon from inside the house, then they're not going to think it's an outside person.
Yeah. So I personally don't put a whole lot of stock into where the murder weapon came from.
That reminds me of Amanda Knox with the knife.
I think, it totally depends on the murder weapon. 99% of people are going to have knives in their kitchen.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, is like, even if you do get takeout 99% of the time, I feel like everybody has a knife.
Right.
Some sort.
It totally depends on the murder weapon, because if you remember the second case that I did in Internet Sleuths, David Hendricks, the murder weapon for David Hendricks was an axe taken from the garage. And I guess that the murderer could have been extremely lucky that they had an axe, but why would you go to the garage to get an axe when you could have just gone to the kitchen when there's 99%? You know what I'm saying? So it's just, if they're using a murder weapon that everybody always has, like a knife, I don't really think that indicates it was somebody from inside the house. But if it's a very specific murder weapon that nobody else would know about, then I kind of think that does lean more towards it was somebody inside the house.
Yeah, especially because I feel like a murderer would be SOL at my house, because my kitchen knives barely cut bread, so I don't know if... I don't know about that one.
So Julie was also given 2 polygraph tests, and she successfully passed both of them. But investigators, they just liked her for the case because they found her story to be so unlikely. They said, why would someone randomly break into her house and only target her son? They believed it to be more likely that Julie murdered her son, perhaps to retaliate against her ex-husband, who had won custody twice. Investigators felt that Julie's account of what happened was not just unlikely, but that it was inconsistent as well. Apparently, Julie would alter the amount of struggle that ensued between her and the assailant on the different times that she told the story. She would change the details, which actually isn't that unusual. People do kind of tend to alter the details a little bit, especially when it's something very traumatic.
Well, I was going to say, I can tell the same story to 5 different people, and the details will change a little bit for, exaggerated effect, or I might remember something from the second time that I didn't remember the first time, or, whatever. So I even tell absolutely true stories that the story changes a little bit.
Mm-hmm. I just don't think it's that odd that some of the details change. She's not changing huge details where one story there was one assailant, one story there was 2 assailants. Little details can change. In an attempt to get a confession, investigators used a technique where they lied to Julie. They told her they found her hair inside Joel's wounds and that this could have only happened if she was the one stabbing him. But this plan didn't work, and Julie did not confess, and instead she then insisted on hiring a lawyer, and she stopped cooperating with the investigation.
So, backing up a little bit, they're saying her only motive is a sort of, if I can't have you, nobody can sort of thing?
Yeah, or just punishing her husband, I guess, for taking her to court and taking her son away.
Okay.
Which, I guess that doesn't really make sense.
Yeah.
If she was that upset about losing custody, she would just be focused on trying to get custody back instead of making it permanent that she would never have her son.
Yeah, because I'm also thinking, other times you hear about awful cases of parents murdering their children, such as, Amanda Hamm or something, which was a case you did on Internet Sleuths. their motive seems to be that they don't want the responsibility of children anymore, or their lover doesn't want their children anymore or something. And that seems to be the opposite here.
Yeah.
She did want him, because if the dad won custody and she didn't want him, then her problem solved.
Yeah, exactly. If she didn't want him, then she could have just given him away.
Yeah.
Over the next 3 years, Julie attempted to move on with her life. She remarried, becoming Julie Harper, and continued on with her education. But on October 12th, 2000, almost exactly 3 years since Joel was murdered, Julie was indicted on capital murder charges. The indictment was filed by a special prosecutor hired by the state after the district attorney declined to file charges based on lack of evidence. So somebody was real gung-ho on making this happen. Now, living in Indiana, Julie attempted to fight the extradition to Illinois because at that time, Illinois had the death penalty, although there was a moratorium on the death penalty at that time. However, she eventually did drop the fight against extradition in exchange for a deal where she would be granted bond once being processed in Illinois.
Hasn't there only ever been a handful of women on death row, though?
Yeah. I
feel like it would be really unlikely.
I don't know. Juries really hate mothers that kill their kids.
Yeah, that's true.
Trial selection began in February 2001 in Fairfield, Illinois. The prosecution had declined to pursue the death penalty, and Julie was being defended by a court-appointed attorney. In their opening statements, the defense and prosecution told the same story, that on October 13th, 1997, 10-year-old Joel died in his bedroom after being stabbed multiple times in the chest. Following this, Julie ran to a neighbor's home for help. But this is where the similarities for both sides ends. The defense claims that a masked intruder had come into the home, taken a knife from the kitchen, killed Joel, then fled when Julie interrupted the murder. The prosecution claimed that this story was preposterous. They claimed that there was not enough evidence that a struggle had ensued in the house, like Julie claimed. But the defense claimed that Julie could not have killed Joel because she did not have any blood on her hands, and there was no blood found in any of the sinks or drains. The prosecution's first witness was Julie's ex-husband, Joel's father, Len. Len firmly believed that Julie was responsible for the murder of their son. He testified that despite Julie having accused him in the past of violence, that she was the violent one. He claimed she had brandished kitchen knives during their fights before. And oddly, he claimed she was obsessed with the number 13, implying significance to the date on which Joel died.
Oh my gosh, I just got goosebumps from that. But if he's saying she has brandished knives during a fight before, that wouldn't be consistent with her picking a date, because that one is that she did in the heat of the moment, and one would be that she planned it out.
Domestic violence against your spouse is completely different than murdering your child.
Yeah.
Those are different MOs. I mean, obviously things can escalate. But
I mean, I'm totally not an expert on domestic violence, but I feel like every time I've heard about it escalating, it's when the abuser was abusing the parent and then turned to the child, but the second parent wasn't involved in this at all. So
right. If she was escalating and she truly wanted custody of her son back, she would have killed Len.
Yeah.
He also testified that when Julie had first become pregnant with Joel, she had briefly considered an abortion, implying that perhaps she never wanted the child at all to begin with. But again, if she didn't want him, then she would have just given up custody.
But that is apples and oranges. Like, to think about an abortion is one thing. You've never met the child. You haven't carried the baby to term and given birth to them and rocked them as a baby and changed their diaper and yada, 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 and grown to love this child. To say, oh, that's gross to me.
Yeah. And one of the articles
He's 10 years old.
I know. One of the articles I read said that they felt that this really hurt her because, I mean, we're talking about 2000, very conservative times. We're talking about the Midwest. We're talking about a small town. People do not like the A word. Crime scene investigator John Lewis testified about his investigation into the crime scene. He said there were inconsistencies with the crime scene and Julie's stories of interrupting the masked intruder and fighting with him throughout the house. He testified that there was no bloody footprints, no blood trail leading to the knife, and he felt that it had not been dropped in surprise by the killer like Julie claimed. He felt that it had been placed or thrown to a specific spot on purpose. He also testified that there were no signs of forced entry and that he did not believe a struggle had happened in that house because no furniture was out of place and no pictures had been knocked off the wall. He also suggested that the injuries she sustained from the alleged struggle were self-inflicted. But she wasn't saying that they were throwing each other around the room, flipping over couches. She said that he was running out of the house and she was holding onto his pant leg.
How can you tell the difference between dropping something and somebody placing it there? That doesn't make any sense to me.
He said something about the blood trail and blood splatter. It didn't really make a lot of sense to me either.
Yeah. And you know what they say is, like, you can get two experts up there to say completely polar opposite things, so...
Yeah. Next, one of the neighbors who had helped Julie after the attack testified. She said that what Julie initially said immediately after the attack was different than what she had told police. The neighbor testified that Julie had said that Julie awoke with the masked intruder standing over her bed, which of course is very different from the other story, that Julie awoke to screaming and found the masked intruder in the son's bedroom. The neighbor also testified that Julie had told her that after the struggle took them outside, the intruder banged her head into the ground before taking his mask off and walking away calmly. The neighbor testified she remembered thinking the story was bizarre and made no sense as Julie was telling it, because it didn't make any sense to her that the intruder would take off his mask, show his face, and then walk away calmly. Which I have to say, not even about the testimony itself. Since when are we allowed to take how somebody felt about somebody's story as testimony?
Yeah, that's true.
Who cares if this neighbor thought that was true or not, or how she felt about it?
I don't know. I feel like I've heard in, like, courtrooms before that the prosecution would say, and what did you think that meant, or something? I don't know. But I guess that it calls for speculation. I don't know. It does.
It absolutely calls for speculation.
But what I'm wondering is, when was she told this story? Was she told this story as she was begging them to call 911? And then if you're super upset about something, like, what you're saying doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Or was she later, like, inviting her over for a cup of coffee and they sat down and, like, laid out the whole scenario? Like,
my understanding is that she's in the neighbor's house in her t-shirt and panties, screaming, begging for her to call 911.
Okay, well, when you're super upset, it's really hard to articulate what you're thinking, because you can think one thing and your mouth says another.
Yeah, and she could have been trying to explain it, and the neighbor misunderstood her or took it the wrong way.
This is a very high emotions are running high.
Yes, absolutely.
And so when your emotions are running high, like, you don't remember what people said exact.
Mm-hmm.
I know from experience. It's possible the neighbor is remembering what she wants to remember.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's possible the neighbor is biased. Maybe the neighbor didn't like her.
Yeah, maybe she thought she was a bad mom.
Exactly. When the forensic pathologist would testify, the connection to the number 13 and Julie would surface again. Joel apparently had been stabbed 13 times. Although other reports I read said that it was actually 14. But I think the pathologist testified it was 13. Another crime scene investigator, Dexter Bartlett, testified that blood had been found on Julie's shirt that she was wearing the night of the murder. Most of the blood was Julie's own blood from her injuries, although there was one smear of blood he testified that he felt was consistent with Julie being the attacker. However, on cross-examination, he admitted that it was possible that the blood had been transferred onto Julie from the attacker as she struggled with him. Investigator Bartlett was considered a blood splatter analysis expert. However, on cross-examination, he admitted he only had an associate's degree and did not have any formal education in forensics or blood splatter. It kind of reminds me of, did you ever watch The Staircase on Netflix?
No. Oh, is that the one where they're not sure if the old man killed his wife by throwing her down the staircase? Yeah, I've heard of it. I haven't watched it.
Well, I've
heard it's, like, dry.
I like it because I like dry.
Okay.
But in it, there's a blood splatter expert, and he gets the guy, and I'm not here to debate whether the guy is guilty or not, but he says that there was blood up inside the shorts, and the only way that could have happened is if he was standing over her and beating her in the head, and that's how she died. And then later it came to be that this guy didn't have really any training, and he had faked a lot of results in a ton of cases. Sometimes I'm just a little cautious when it comes to blood splatter analysis because I just want to know what their credentials are.
I just keep on thinking about, like, all those episodes of Dexter where he recreates the crime scenes with all those big sheets of plastic.
Right. And I wonder in some of these cases how much work is actually going into it and how much is speculative.
Yeah.
Blood analysis can be a really important part of investigations, and it's a really hard job, but sometimes I think there are people who are doing it that aren't well equipped to be doing it. Following the prosecution resting, the defense began their case. The case mostly involved calling character witnesses who testified that Julie was a wonderful mother who would never hurt her son. They also called a pathologist who testified that he did not believe that Julie's injuries were self-inflicted. Julie's obstetrician was called, who testified that Julie had been happy to be pregnant with Joel and was a good mother. I think it's just so crazy that we have to get an obstetrician to defend this woman for having a second where she was considering her choices. Are we really going to put this woman on trial for considering her choices?
Obviously. Literally.
That's
not normal.
Another pathology expert was called who testified that Joel's blood on Julie's shirt were transfer stains and that it couldn't have occurred from Julie being the attacker. Following these witnesses, the defense rested and both sides prepared for their closing arguments. Julie did not testify in her own defense. After the closing arguments, the jury deliberated for 5.5 hours before finding Julie guilty of first-degree murder of her son. Supporters of Julie were outraged. They felt there was no direct evidence linking Julie to the murder of her son. They felt that she had been found guilty because her husband had claimed she was crazy and biased the jury by saying that Julie might have considered an abortion at one time, which, by the way, Julie completely denies.
I just honestly can't even believe that that's allowed in. Like, what was the judge thinking that that's, like, allowed to be in as evidence? Because...
but I also almost feel like that's a weakness of the defense, not fighting to get that withheld and fighting the neighbor's feelings from being withheld. Nobody needs to know that. How does that matter? How is a thought that she had 10 years ago relevant to what's happening right now? It's not.
Well, I mean, we don't know what the defense argued and what the judge allowed.
Yeah, I guess.
But, I mean, what if the judge was, like, really pro-life?
Yeah, I don't know.
But I just can't believe that that's, like, allowed in as evidence.
I know. There's so many times where I hear a case, and I think that is so prejudicial that never should have been allowed in, and it's something that really did sway the jury.
Yeah.
Joel's father, on the other hand, felt Julie got exactly what she deserved.
I'm sure he did.
In a statement, he said he felt no sympathy for her whatsoever. Julie was sentenced to 65 years in prison. But our story doesn't end there. Just weeks after being sentenced, ABC aired a 2020 special on Joel's case. Diane Fanning watched the episode. An author, she was currently working on a book about convicted serial killer Tommy Lynn Sells. She had been corresponding with him in prison via letters. After hearing Joel's story, she felt that there might have been some similarities between Joel's story and Tommy Sells' prolific history. Tommy Lynn Sells was born a twin on June 28, 1964. He is known as the cross-country killer or the coast-to-coast killer. He was convicted of 2 murders, but is confirmed to be connected with at least 10 murders, and he has claimed credit or is connected to about 70 or 80 total murders.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So he's just bragging about all these murders he's done if he's claiming credit?
Yeah. Or just cases that fit his MO and he was there around that time. But I mean, think about how insane that is. It's like the craziest serial killers you can think of. Even Ted Bundy wasn't anywhere near 80.
No, like, pretty much the only ones I know of that are up near like that is like the Green River Killer.
I think the Golden State Killer clocked in around 40. Mm-hmm. At least that we know of. At only 18 months old, Tommy and his twin sister both developed a really bad case of meningitis. Unfortunately, his sister succumbed to the illness, but Tommy recovered. And I really have to wonder if this encephalopathy that he had would somehow cause brain damage that eventually led Tommy to who he became. Tommy would also later in life admit that he had been molested as a child and that the rage he felt from that came out during his crimes. But, of course, his disposition was not helped by the large amount of drugs he used, ranging from heroin to stimulants, hallucinogenics, and large amounts of alcohol. From 1979 to 1999, he was homeless and would hitchhike across America committing crimes such as grand theft auto, which is why he received his first jail sentence. It was during this time he was diagnosed with a myriad of mental illnesses, including borderline personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, schizoid personality disorder, substance abuse disorder, bipolar disorder, major depressive disorder, and psychosis.
Oh my gosh.
The earliest murder Tommy is connected to is the murder of a woman and her young son in 1985. Tommy was working as a carnival worker and met the young mother at the carnival.
Oh no.
She invited Tommy to her house. He claimed that she went through his backpack and he thought that she was stealing his cocaine. So he decided the next logical step would be to beat her to death with a baseball bat and then slit her throat. So, of course, this ruckus woke up the poor young little boy, and he came out to see what was going on, so Tommy killed him too.
Oh my god. How old was he again?
I don't know how... It was a little boy, that's all I know.
Oh, that's so...
It's terrible. I know.
It's terrible because I doubt that he could have identified him. Like...
No, this guy was just a monster for the sake of being a monster.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you think somebody's taking your cocaine, then take your bag and get out.
Yeah. I mean, she's giving you a nice warm place to sit for the night. You can't share a little bump with her.
Oh my gosh. What a monster.
Over the next decade, Tommy lived a transient lifestyle, traveling around the country and murdering people when he felt like it, which is, obviously how he got those nicknames, Coast to Coast Killer. And the details of his murders are particularly grisly and disturbing, and there's not really a reason to get into them right now. I just want to note that for each of these murders he's connected to or eventually admitted to, there was not always a clear motive. It appeared at times he did just murder just for the sake of murder.
It's almost like he had an itch to scratch.
Yeah, I mean...
So he didn't care who it was.
No, and I think it goes back to, he said that he was taking out his anger for being molested as a child. He's on cocaine, which makes you super erratic and angry. And he just felt, instead of, working through these issues, getting help, he decided to take it out on other poor innocent people who had never hurt him.
Well, I feel like most people that are murdered in cold blood didn't hurt the person.
Right. His murders were violent, often used a knife, and similar to what we see happen to Joel. But things would change for Tommy. One day, he had been welcomed into a young woman's home. He had claimed to her...
Is he, extremely good looking? How's he getting into all these young women's homes?
People just felt sorry for him. That people were nice. He was just taking advantage of people's niceness. So what happened?
I'm nice, but I'm not going to invite...
Well,
oh my gosh.
He told this woman that he and his wife and children were stranded. And so she offered to give him some money, some clothes, and she said, come on in my house, let me grab some clothes for you. You can take it back to your wife.
Oh.
So as she was filling bags with food and clothes, Tommy then began to attack her. He took a knife from her kitchen.
Oh my gosh.
And used it to threaten her as he sexually assaulted her. But during the attack, she found an opportunity to fight back. She used a ceramic statue to bash him in the head. She gained control of the knife and she fought back with it. She then was able to call 911. But despite being a violent sexual criminal caught literally red-handed, Tommy was able to secure a plea deal for 2 to 10 years. He served 5 and was released in May 1997. Following his prison sentence, Tommy must have rethought his pattern of attacks. You see, before his sentence, Tommy had killed people of all ages, including multiple family members at the same time. But after his last victim, this 20-year-old woman who was able to fight back, Tommy then solely targeted children 16 and under.
Going back a little bit, though, when he took her kitchen knife, he had been standing in her home, no?
Yeah.
So he saw that there was a kitchen knife available to attack.
Yes.
But that's a horse of a different color from breaking into somebody's home expecting there to be one.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it just kind of goes back to what we said where you're pretty safe to assume somebody has a knife.
Yeah.
This brings us to the night Diane Fanning watched the 2020 special about Joel. Just 2 days later in Springfield, Missouri, Tommy abducted and murdered a 13-year-old girl. Diane wrote to Tommy telling him she had heard about the case of a boy who had been killed in Illinois. The mother claimed someone had come into the house and done it. She says he replied to her letter and asked if it was the murder that happened 2 days before he murdered that girl in Springfield. He then admitted that he had had an encounter with Julie and Joel in a convenience store. He claimed that Julie had been rude to him, and he wanted to keep Joel from growing up with a mother like that, so he decided to follow them and murder Joel. Despite Tommy being in Missouri 6 hours away 2 days later, some witnesses said that they saw him an hour and a half away from Lawrenceville, Illinois, in the days leading up to the murder of Joel. By the time Tommy made this confession that he was the one who killed Joel, he was on death row in Texas for the murder of a 13-year-old and 10-year-old girl. Illinois investigators went and they met with Tommy on death row. He couldn't confirm it was Joel for sure, and he even said he wasn't even sure if the murder that he was thinking of was in Illinois. But his story sounded similar. He said he went into the house, got a knife, and began stabbing a young boy. Then the mother came in, they struggled, but he was able to get away. Investigators asked why he didn't use the knife on the mom, and he said it was because he had dropped the knife when she came into the bedroom because he had been startled. But investigators felt that there were some inconsistencies. For example, Julie had claimed that the attacker had a mask and took the mask off before fleeing. But Tommy said that he had been wearing a hoodie with the hood pulled up around his face. But, I mean, to me, this actually almost makes more sense. Because I agree, it doesn't make sense. Why would an intruder take the mask off in front of you and then walk away? But if he had a hoodie pulled around his face and they're out in the backyard struggling, the hoodie could come off. And in that moment of fight or flight and panic, she might have thought that the hoodie was a mask.
Well, also, I'm sure it was extremely dark.
Yeah. So I actually think that makes even more sense to me.
Well, I want to know, were there any other cases this could have been? Because he's admitting to a murder. Like, were there other unsolved young boy murders with...
That I don't know. But I also know that serial killers are notorious for admitting to things that they hadn't done because they think it makes them sound cooler to have a high body count.
Yeah.
So maybe the police were thinking that he's just full of it.
Yeah.
I don't know. But they didn't believe him because they said that there were these inconsistencies. Julie had maintained that she believed the intruder was a teenager, but Tommy had been in his 30s, not at all easy to confuse with a teenager. But again, she saw his face for like 2 seconds after the mask or hoodie came off and he ran away. In the dark. In the panic.
Well, also, like, if he's done 80 murders, then maybe he's mistaken about wearing a hoodie or a mask.
Yeah, they all have to blur together at some point. Also, she had said the intruder was not the same height as her, but she and Tommy were actually the exact same height. But again, they're struggling. She's panicked. It's dark. I just don't think that these inconsistencies are that big of a deal.
Well, especially if she's on the ground because she had rug burn.
Yeah.
How would you know somebody's your height?
Right. The only time she saw him standing was when she opened the door and he was standing there. And then he dragged her. And then they're fighting in the backyard. And then he's running away. And
if he did have a hood that was up, that could have made him appear taller.
Yeah. So I just think these inconsistencies to me aren't that big of a deal. I think they're all pretty easily explained away. But investigators felt that Tommy was simply confessing to anything so that he could buy himself more time before the execution. Because if he confesses to things, then investigators come and take his story, and then the execution gets pushed.
Well, that's happening regardless with this, so...
Right. By now, the Illinois Innocence Project had taken on Julie's case. And
that's a big deal.
That is it's hard to get an Innocence Project to take your case. They have to actually believe you're actually innocent.
Yes.
In 2004, they were actually able to get the charges vacated based on a crazy technicality. Remember how I had said that the prosecutor who tried the case was brought in because the DA wouldn't do it? Mm-hmm. Well, the prosecutor who tried the case was not actually legally allowed to have done so.
Oh, in their district or something?
Something along those lines. Mm-hmm. So Julie's charges were vacated and she was released from prison only to be immediately rearrested on the same charges. Julie and her supporters had hoped that the confession from Tommy Sells would be enough to prevent a second trial, but it seemed that the state of Illinois was interested in retrial. In July 2006, Julie's second trial began, and the stories were the same. The prosecution didn't go as far as to say that Julie killed Joel just to get back at her ex-husband, but they did bring up to the jury the custody dispute, including that Julie had just lost her appeal 2 months before Joel's death. But this time, the defense didn't have just the story of a random person who had broken into the house. They had the confession of a prolific serial killer who was known for doing similar crimes. The defense pointed out that they did not have to prove that Tommy was the killer, but that they could show that there was reasonable doubt that Julie had done it. In the trial, the prosecution's blood expert who testified in the first trial now claimed that Joel's blood on his mother's shirt was made from Joel's hands as he pushed away his mother while she stabbed him. This is the blood that the defense had said was a smear. Mm-hmm. And they're now...
Wouldn't you see actual 4 or 5?
Well, the blood expert was saying that he could see a handprint.
Oh.
That nobody else could see.
Okay.
On cross-examination, though, he did admit that he had never measured Joel's hand, and so he didn't actually know the size of Joel's hand, so he couldn't actually know if that smear was the size of Joel's hand.
Okay.
When asked why his testimony for this trial was different from the first, he claimed the questions asked him from the DA had been different, and that he had not brought up the handprint in the first trial because he just wasn't asked.
I feel like that's something you would bring up.
It seems a little important.
Yeah.
In both trials, the prosecution had no direct evidence linking Julie to the murder, but for the second trial, hearing the confession of someone else confessing to the murder of Joel may have outweighed the circumstantial evidence. The jury were able to hear the recorded confession of Tommy Sells. Also different in this trial, Julie took the stand in her own defense. She adamantly denied having killed her son. The defense also brought up another possible suspect, Joel's own uncle, Ed Kirkpatrick. Investigators admitted that they had not thoroughly investigated Ed. The only statement he gave to police was that he had nothing to do with the murder and didn't want to talk about it, and he then left the country and had not yet returned at the time of the second trial. Which, could totally be a coincidence, but they're just bringing up, hey, look at all these people that could have done it that weren't investigated.
Right.
It's reasonable doubt.
Yeah.
They're doing a good job. In their closing statement, the prosecution focused on the circumstantial evidence. They pointed out how the killer had used a knife from the kitchen. They pointed out how Julie's description of the killer did not match Tommy. They claimed that even though Julie had been emotional during the trial, there had been no real tears, so they said it was all a show. They claimed blaming the death on Tommy would be easier because no one wants to believe a mother would kill her son, but that it was really just a red herring. Finally, the case was given to the jury. 9 years after Joel's murder and after 12 hours of deliberation, Julie was found not guilty for the murder of her son. The prosecution was disappointed with the result. They released a statement that said that just because Julie was found not guilty, that was not the same thing as being found innocent. They also said that the case was considered closed and that they would not reopen the investigation in pursuit of other suspects. A juror who gave a comment said that while the Tommy Sells serial killer theory was interesting, that he was not the reason they found Julie not guilty. They found her not guilty because there was just no direct evidence linking her to the murder. In 2014, Tommy Sells was executed via lethal injection. Since then, Julie has been struggling to readjust to life outside of prison. She has been unable to keep a job and feels that she is stigmatized by her legal history, despite being formally exonerated and receiving a certificate of innocence from the state of Illinois. She and her second husband eventually divorced. She then moved to Tennessee to be closer to her parents. As of 2018, she was still unemployed. In an interview in December, she said one of the worst parts is that Joel will never receive justice for what happened to him.
That's like so much to unpack right there. I think it's really crappy, in my personal opinion, that the DA's office is so certain it's her that they won't even look into anybody else right now.
Yeah, I just think that aren't we supposed to be looking for justice instead of wins?
Did they ever look into anybody else besides like touching the hood of the car?
Not to my knowledge.
Yeah, like they're just so sure that it's her.
This case is crazy to me because when our sister was first telling me about this case, she was saying the boy died and nobody was in the house but the mother. I was thinking, oh, well, the mother did it. Absolutely. And like 95% of the time, it is the closest person. It's the mother or the lover. But after hearing this case and actually reading the details and the serial killer, I really swung the other way. And
so you're 100% convinced she's innocent?
I'm never 100% convinced of anything.
Yeah, I'm never 100%. I used to work for a defense attorney, so I can argue anybody's innocence. Like, I look into every single detail that you say, and I'm saying, that doesn't make sense, that doesn't make sense. So, like, I'm trying to... But, I'm not convinced at all she's innocent. There was definitely enough doubt to have her not convicted, which is what happened. But I think that they should still look into other options. That doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah. Because
unless you have a confession and the person has the murder weapon in their hand, why wouldn't you always look into more suspects with every case?
Yeah, because if Tommy Lynn really didn't do it, and he really was just trying to buy more time before his lethal injection, and Julie didn't do it, then who did do it? Mm-hmm. There's a child murderer running around. It's also really sad to me just that how stigmatized somebody's life can be. It's just like, if she really is innocent, she lost her son. She has been completely stigmatized by society. I know that usually you get some sort of cash payout when you're wrongfully convicted, but it's usually not enough to live on forever. You still need to get a job, and I
doubt she got much of anything, if anything at all.
It was really sad to me to read her interview about how stigmatized her life has been since then.
This case is very mind-boggling to me. We'll probably never know what happened.
So what do you guys think? We would love to hear from you guys and tell us what you think. Do you think that Julie is responsible for the murder of her son? Do you think it was Tommy Lynn Sells, the serial killer? Or do you think that it might have even been a third person? So reach out to us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. You can email us at notyournormalmurder@gmail.com. Let us know your thoughts. Of course, you can always let us know what type of future cases you would like to hear from us. And make sure you leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen to podcasts.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.